what we thought we would do right now is recap a little bit of where we have been. Since we have the Trinity down, I thought we would again go over why we say there is such a thing as Christian mysticism, which doesn't belong to any other revelation of God. It's like nothing else. And so I just thought we would put these little straws back in the water here. Here comes this Jewish gentleman, and what he gets from this is God utterly transcendent. And that's what's been revealed to him. That's the path. That's what the goal, to know this, live according to it. And so you take it away in this Judaic, and they have their mystics, believe me. And the greatest of them all was Philo of Alexandria. I can't say enough. I think he's one of the greatest mystics that ever lived. And remember, he was born 30 years before Jesus was born. And of course, he was from Alexandria, never heard of Christianity, never heard of the man Jesus, nothing. And he wrote this book here that, in my view, it really got, to some extent, you could almost say it got Christianity off the ground. He brought that Trinity together. His transcendent and the philosophical logos and his spirit, it's all in Philo. And he knew it. And he talks about this, and yet he's totally Jewish. It's the most... So, let us not... I've often said that somebody who gets in here, who has this revelation of God, if he really goes with it, he's going to get the whole shebang. But then we have this... But anyway, the Judaism is originally... putting aside its mystics like Philo, anyway, this is Judaism's primary revelation of God utterly transcendent. And then we have this beautiful revelation here of Hinduism, and that's primarily focused on God within yourself. Find God within yourself. And this seems to be, from my studies anyway, this seems to be the primary revelation of God to them. And the goal, the way, the path, this is how they see that. But I'm convinced too. They have their Trinity. And you know, you can find it there. You can see it there, even in their little triumvirate that they call, I don't know, Vishnu or whatever they call this thing here. But anyway, you can see how they understood these three major manifestations of God in their Trinity. So this guy's going to get here too. And then we have, let's talk about our nature religions. Now here, this is huge for me, because I regard this as God's first revelation to man. And here we've got that beautiful logos. And this, of course, the philosophers had this, the Stoics. And just remember this. It's so important to remember this, that these three philosophies, that your eclectic approach to philosophy as a religion here was in place when Jesus was born. Thousands, they say, of religious sects existed in this Greek-speaking world and all around, in Syria and all the, you know, in those days, in Iran, those are names of the countries that we have today, and in Turkey and in Egypt. These are names that we have today. But these are all the surroundings where you had the influence of philosophy and the influence of religion, really, and they were all seeking oneness with God. They were all seeking oneness with God at the time of when Jesus was born. Of course, outside his little Jewish conclave. And then, of course, we have this next revelation, and this is, what is this? This is Christianity. And, well, the reason we put this going to the bottom here is because it will include them all. This is the Trinity. And this includes God transcendent, God within yourself, and God omnipresent and throughout nature, and one with the matter. And we have all our nature religions based on that. The Stoics, that world religion at that time, was premised on this. And all these sects, different sects at the time of Christ, outside of Judaism, we're all seeking this oneness with God. So, given the world at this time here, now we're ready. Once these revelations of God are in place, And we've come upon this Trinity, which has not even yet been defined. We've got it there, but it hasn't been brought together. You've got to see it together. Now we're ready for this tremendous revelation that we call Christ. Because what does Christ answer? All these people are seeking oneness with the transcendent, oneness with the God within, oneness with this wonderful God in nature. And they're all seeking this oneness. And here comes Christ. And it's telling you, it's telling man, all those who are seeking, you are one with God. And you can be, ultimately your eternal life is total oneness with God. What you're seeking is God's plan for man, and that's why you're seeking it. Somehow you already know this. But this is the true nature of Christ, is man's eternal oneness with God. That's the answer to man's questions, to all his ultimate seeking, his desires and uplifting to God and everything. It inspires him in nature, something in himself, the other transcendent. This Christ answers all these questions here. So, this Christianity, you might say, that's the heart of its mysticism. It begins and in a way ends in that Trinity. Only with the revelation of Christ, now we see Christ in that Trinity. And that's our place in God. That's our eternal oneness with God, is Christ. And that's what we're about. And that's what Christian mysticism is. And it's not this particular revelation or this or this. It is a genre in itself. So don't get this idea that it's all the same, there's one experience and everybody interprets it, according to their culture or somebody's religious idea or anything else. Each of these is a bona fide religion. All of these have the truth, the beautiful truth. All man's what I call genuine religions based on the revelation of God, they're all the truth. And so we have to respect all these religions and love them. I really do personally. I love all religion. Well, I should say, not so much read, but I love those people who are into it, seeking their spiritual life through their religion. I understand them. I just feel I understand them. So these are all beautiful mysticisms in themselves. But I just want you to see the position that Christianity is really, it may include this, but it is not that. It is not Hinduism, it is not Judaism, and it's not, I don't know what to call our nature religions, but there's a bunch of them around. And so in a way it's kind of New Age stuff, I think, nature religions when I think about it. Of course, I love the stories of our American Indians and their spirit and how their approach to God and all they went through, their purification and everything else there to be some kind of a, well, I don't like the word shaman, but I'm saying that this, somebody appointed by God, they have this feeling that this was prior to Christianity. In other words, if you really study all these ancient things, they all had God there. God has been revealed to every human being. You just have to recognize it. So anyway, that's why I wanted to recapitulate. And that Christ, the revelation of Christ, though, is not for some Christian. Was never meant for a Christian. There was no Christianity around. There was no Christianity around. Just remember that. Jesus was not a Christian. He was this. God, utterly transcendent. That was his belief system. And I think he was surprised. Of course, he knew, but it's so interesting. He knew this so-called father, and that for him that was Yahweh. God was not just his biological father, which is the truth, but of course he understood his biological father as being Yahweh. Almighty God was his father. No, he understood that. That was his understanding. But he also knew, he spoke of, he exhibited that spirit within him, didn't he? Well, they talk about it. He said he felt the spirit move within him. The spirit moved, it indwelled in him. And nobody's ever denied that. All the fathers recognized that the spirit indwelled in that man, Jesus. And that he was one with the Father. And but I think what really surprises them is that resurrection. Boy, that is the Logos. That is one of the big revelations of the Logos. God's oneness even with matter. God's transforming matter. Our own bodies, what we think of them, God's transforming them. Of course, Paul calls it a spiritual body, and I'm with him on that. I don't know people who think that they're going to rise in some kind of their physical body. You know, those kind of people, they think that heaven is some planet someplace. How can you live in a physical body, such as you know it now, that isn't on some planet? In some material place? But Christianity does not believe, at least I know Catholics, and the church does not teach that heaven is a place. I think Augustine, I've got quotes on Augustine, he had problems with what we call the simple folk. He said if you made it too transcendent to them, it was like non-existent. You had to bring it down to something material here. But a lot of people are like that. You know, it's got to be something that they can grasp. You just can't talk about some immaterial soul. You have to be able to manifest that through nature, through something. And so, I don't know, Augustine could understand this, like pure spirit here. He seemed to have a hold of that. But he said that the simple folk, that they don't have that grasp. And so you had to pretty much concretize everything for them. That's how he kind of felt about it. And I have no problem with that. I have no problem. Because that's the way the human mind works. As I was telling Tim this morning, you know, man has a polytheistic mind. He needs something to focus on. And the other day I mentioned Father Mike Kamaldali's, I shouldn't say he's my friend, Mario. I just happened to meet him at the Hermitage. He's a prior of one of the Italian houses of Kamaldali's monks. And he's the one who gave the little sermon on people trying to cage Jesus into a miracle worker, into a prophet. Remember when Jesus said, well, who do other people say I am, you know? That he was Elias returned, and he was all these things. People wanted to, well, he called it caged him, but it's something else. I wish I could remember certain, because he really made the point that Christ ran away. Jesus ran away from all that business here. That you cannot pinpoint the truth of Christ. You just can't pinpoint it and box somebody in and say, well, that's it, or he's this, or he's that, whatever. He said that Jesus knew that and ran away from it all. And he refused to be a guru. He was not. Although he did say to the apostles, he said, I've shared with you everything that my Father has given me to know. Now, what more can you say? What a beautiful thing like that to say. I share with you, I've told you, in one way or another, everything that I have learned from God. And I think that's a beautiful. But I was going to say about this whole guru business, that, you know, nobody can teach you the spiritual life. That's why I say, if you think somebody can teach you the spiritual life, you've aborted your journey. You're retarded. You cannot follow somebody else's teaching. Your spiritual life is with you and God alone. Nobody else. Absolutely nobody else. Now, you can listen to other people for inspiration and some ideas and to encourage you, above all. Everybody needs encouragement and to learn how to persevere. And we can learn from other people as far as their personal life goes, to persevere, stick in there, how they did this, try to do this. But as far as teaching you how your journey's going to go, how it's supposed to go, how you do this, you do that, and all these rules and regulations that we have, it's not going to work. This is strictly between you and Almighty God. And God's the doer. Only God transforms. And only God can really lead you. And so don't look to anybody else. And I find that an example in the man Jesus. He did not want other people just to follow him around and have all these expectations. Now you're going to do this, now this and that kind of thing. And he escaped that. He did not want that. He always ran off to be by himself. And I think that's a beautiful example in his life. You know, the monks, the eremitical hermit monks, boy, they make a big thing out of Christ, constantly going off by himself, you know. Silence and solitude. Get away from us all here. Jesus, just in those few 3 years that we know of his life, he did that almost constantly. And so this should speak to our spiritual life too. You know, our need to get away. And because Jesus didn't follow anybody, did he? Who did Jesus follow? Nobody. Almighty God was there for him. So anyway, I don't want anybody to. Christianity it's got its own genre of revelation of God. That's what it's based on. And Christianity is based first and foremost on the Trinity. As I've often said, first you got to know God, and then you're ready for Christ. A lot of people just focus on Christ, and they don't know anything about really the Trinity or God. After all, the Trinity is God. This is the Godhead. First you have to know God, and then you start thinking about your eternal oneness with God, and there is Christ. Do you understand putting first things first? That it is so important. You've got to know God. You have to seek God. Then you can start thinking about Christ. And I don't know how else you could run your spiritual life. I don't understand it. At least I don't. I can't imagine putting Christ first. I didn't even know anything about Christ. All I know, and I call it my conversion experience when I was 15, when I asked God, do I have any eternal oneness with you? And that was the answer, Christ. Christ is your eternal oneness with God, and you have to be transformed into Christ. And that never meant to me be transformed into some other man or some other person here. It makes no sense. I never lived my spiritual life on that kind of thing. But I thought, well, you know what? I don't really know ahead of time what this Christ is. I don't know what I'm going to be transformed into. But I don't care. Because this is going to be God's doing. And God is the only one who really knows it's Christ's thing. And so God is going to transform me. And I just stick with God. And let God do the transforming. And that's why I say sometimes we think we know all about Christ. We think we can pinpoint Christ, point him out, make this, some kind of center of our life. And I tell you, well, I can't imagine that working. Don't ask me about that. I can't do it. God is the center of our life. This whole Trinity here, it'll keep you busy, that Trinity, for the rest of your life. This is God here. Realizing that in your own life. In fact, that whole Trinity in you is God transforming you. All the three of them are the Trinity. We often refer to the Holy Spirit as the transformer, the enlightener. This is the dynamic in us that's really doing this. We often think of this. But I got to tell you that this ground of being is right in there with it, and this logos is going right along with this whole thing. The whole Trinity is actually, where there's one, there's the three. There's the three. And but once you're tuned to the Trinity, you see that in your life. But you have to be attuned to the Trinity before you see this fullness of God really working in your life here. So I put that down. That, to me, that's the essence of Christian mysticism. That's first and foremost is that Trinity. And then, of course, I see Christ, oddly enough, not as particularly Christian. I see Christ as everybody's oneness with God. And this is the way I wish that Christianity would present Christ. In Hinduism in Asia, Christianity has made no inroads in India or Asia, and whole big part of the world, Christianity's never made any inroads there. And that's because he's not, I say he, but anyway, Christ is not presented correctly. Christ is not understood by these people as being their oneness with God. And that's what the Christian calls Christ. And the impact of that and what that means. And they don't, like in Hinduism, and I know they say, well, that you have your Christ, we have our Krishna. But they're premised on totally different understandings, put it that way. So, but I see Christ in these other religions and in these all their holy people. Some, not those that the books say, or is this enlightened guy or that. I have my own idea who is and who isn't in these other religions. But anyway, okay, so, yeah. Now, I think that where we were at, what we want to do here is, because we want to spend time at the end of this retreat for people's questions and to try and get maybe, and for me to pick up some loose ends and give you some quotes. This is why we're going to go through now this, the end of what I call the last two sheets that people get is called Christ Still With Us. And then we have the talk on faith, which is one of the most important things that I have to give, is this thing on faith. Some people have gotten more out of that than anything I've said at all during the retreat here. So anyway, we want to pick up on this Christ Still With Us here. Now, we just want to keep in mind that as divine, that the Logos, the eternal form of God, this is the divine. Now, this is the divine Christ. The Logos is the divine, the divinity of Christ. Is that Logos? And the humanity, that is universal man. So if you're with me on that. So how is Christ with us today? Then we have prior to creation, I point out the Logos. And after creation, first of all, the Logos we call the eternal form of God. But after creation, we have the one within many forms and the many in the one eternal form. So after creation, we have, we can think of the Logos as the one with many forms and the many in the one eternal form, the many in this Logos here. So therefore, because of this, we can refer to the cosmic Christ. This is this divine united with the whole of nature here. So that is always with us. I tend to be, I don't mind these cosmic Christ, what we call that, because it does remind us that matter and everything that exists is one with God. That's what it really means, this cosmic Christ. And that is always with us and has always been with us. So this is just one way in which we can say Christ isn't just still with us, but has always, in a way, been with us. And then it says, after the incarnation here, we have the oneness, the divine and human essence, created and uncreated, a spirit and matter, flesh and blood. This is kind of interesting. When we talk about flesh and blood and spirit and matter, something this just reminds me of something to bring out here, which I do in my chapter on the Eucharist here, is that what blood, now we all know flesh, that's matter. But when they talk about spirit, the symbol for spirit was blood, because that's the life of the body. They thought that the soul was somehow connected to blood because it was the life of the body. For example, you take all blood from the body. Well, there's not going to be any life in the body. That's pretty obvious. Remember, even when Jesus died, didn't they say that they pierced the lance and only water came out? Yeah, that there was no blood left. He had literally bled to death in a way. So, so blood has always meant, my understanding of this now, don't quote me to the Jews, but my understanding is that Judaism, with the slaughter of the animals and everything else, that this is, you're donating this precious life. They never killed out of anything, but they thought it was sacred. I mean, this is something you're going to give to God. The life. Blood meant life. in Judaism. And I say this is not dogma I'm saying, but this is, and I've read it. I've read this here. So take it or leave it, but because you do wonder about this blood. You know, we have the bread and wine, signifying body and blood. Well, blood was the life, and that's the soul. So the wine would be the soul, and the bread would be the body. Are you with me on that? I hope to make that clear. And that's why even at the Last Supper, that's what Jesus was referring to, his body and blood, the life, meaning his body and his soul. So we don't get that clear to us today in Christianity, do we? No, they don't get anything right to tell you the truth. So anyway, this is the oneness of after the incarnation. We have the created, the uncreated, spirit and matter, and flesh and blood. And then after the resurrection, now we have these different, now Hillary, well, I can't go over all that. Because Hillary of, let me see, Marcellus was Ankara, and Hillary is Pontier. He's the one who told everybody, now listen, you guys. You know, everybody was trying to, all these fathers of the church, trying to get Christ together, this big problem. He said, now listen, you guys, this is a theological gem, and so I'll pass it on to all of you. It's a gem of all time. He said, what you people have to do, he said, is just remember what he called the three states of Christ. And everybody should remember this. We should teach this in the churches. Prior to the incarnation, there was no Jesus, no Christ. There was just God, the Logos. This is what he tells us. Prior, this is the first thing that we've got here, is God, the Logos. No Jesus and no Christ. The second stage here, state he called this. This is the Logos' oneness with human nature. And here we really have Christ and the man Jesus. But we have it on this, you know, as we knew him, the historical Jesus and what we know about this. And he said, then the third state is the resurrected, ascended, glorious, transfigured, transformed, the Christ. This is the ultimate Christ. And, of course, he calls it perfect. Now we have perfect man and perfect God. Now, what he's saying here is that the way that we see Jesus' historical life, it was, you know, just like ours, really. And the third state, what he called, this is what we're going to be. This is how it's going to go in the end. And he said, you mix these up here. If you try to make him God, or you mix up and you're just talking about this divine, deified, heavenly Christ here, you're missing his whole incarnate life on earth. I hope you all understand the difference here. Because he said, yeah, and I know that a lot of these fathers were talking past one another. They should all have agreed that this is what we're talking about. Because now Hillary, I have it someplace in here. He defines what this means. He said, because sometimes, he said, the reason Hillary came up with this is because there were big fights over who said what in the Gospels. Was God speaking here? Was this Christ? Was just this the man Jesus? What are all these references in here? And Hillary brought out, he said, sometimes he's talking before he was ever, about God. Before he was ever around. And maybe his coming, his planning, whatever. And then he's talking about himself as he is right now here. And sometimes he was talking about what he is, you know, going to be. And that was his way of, anyway, trying to discern. And there is some truth in that, because Jesus knew he was going to be resurrected. He knew ahead of a whole lot of stuff, actually, ahead of time, where he was going. And so when he's talking about that, and then he's talking about, you know, how things are right now, it's a little different. And, of course, as to what he was even prior to his coming into this world here, well, you know, I'm not into the Bible stuff, but maybe you can divide it up like this. But this is the way Hillary warned everybody. Don't mix them up. Jesus never existed prior to the incarnation. Christ never existed prior. We just have God. And so you can say, well, if Jesus might be talking about the Father or God. He didn't know the Logos anyway, God, prior to his birth. And he could have been talking about that. And then, of course, he was talking about his oneness with God. And right then and there. And he's talking about his eternal life with God. But what's this also, what Hillary's saying also brings out that for all of us, what we can all learn from the Hillary's making these 3 points that are so important, is that Jesus, as Hillary said, here you have man and God, here you have Christ, but this is the human, you know, the earthly, how he lived out his life. And then he says, in the end, though, it's only in the end, the 3rd state, that we get perfect man and perfect God. Meaning that Jesus still had a ways to go. And I want to tell you, there isn't a father in the church who did not believe that the ultimate, what they call deification, divinization, whatever you want to call it, never happened to Jesus until his resurrection and ascension. That was their understanding in all of Christianity. Jesus was not what we would call completed, was not elevated, was not given this ultimate divine status that we've given him until his resurrection and ascension. There's no father that disagreed with that. None of them. And so what this means is that even though you live your life with oneness with God on, like Jesus did, your creation isn't over. Your journey is not over. Christ, this man Jesus, was not the final word on Christ. That final word lies beyond just what we know of that historical man Jesus. It's beyond that. What it really should tell us that our creation isn't over until it's over. That we still have a ways to go. Jesus still had a ways to go. He had to have his mission. He had to give his whole life for what he knew. And then comes this beautiful God elevating him and with the resurrection and the ascension. And his glory. And we're all going to participate. That's our life too. That's our life too. So that's our end. Don't think that this man Jesus was at the end. The historical person. He wasn't. He wasn't. And so I think Hillary, his point is well taken. That even after somebody, you can live your whole life with oneness of God on this earth, which is the way to live it. I think God intended everybody to live this way, because it's the good life. And then, it's only then, with death and resurrection and ascension, now this is this final transformation into everything that we'll call it the divine Christ. And even when I say divine, I don't mean it in the monophysitic sense, that everybody really takes it. That's why I say Christianity is pure monophysitism, where Christ is some divine person here. And to me, that's total monophysitism. Because where you have a divine person, you've got a divine being. And you've got one divine nature. And this is the definition of monophysitism. Christianity is monophysitic. You know what? A lot of things that the church, the old church and everything wanted to call, oh, this is a heresy, this is a heresy, this kind of thing here. Well, you know what? If we paid attention to all that, everybody's a heretic in one way or the other. I mean, everybody's got their own view of God, their own view of Christ and everything. I mean, we're all a bunch of heretics as far as that goes. Because they're definitely monophysitic. And the people are... I think Christians would be shocked if they heard that they were, what do we call those? Anthropoliratrists, people who worshipped a human being as God here. They would be shocked to find that out. Because, you know, all you have to do is go outside some church and people coming out of church and say, do you believe Jesus is God? What do you think they're going to say? They're all going to say yes. They're going to say, yes, Jesus is God. Well, I'm going to give you the definition here of anthropolatry. Now, that's how I pronounce it, because I've never heard people talk about this. It's spelled, this is a philosophical dictionary definition of anthropolatry, P-O-L-A-T-R-Y. I don't know where they put the accent on that. I'll have to look that up again. Anyway, it says, the worshiping or cult of a human being conceived as God, and conversely of a God conceived as a human being. The deification of individual human beings was practiced by most early civilizations and added much color to the folklore and religion of each countries, as Egypt, Greece, India, and Japan. The Shinto religion of Japan still considers the emperor as a visible deity and maintains shrines devoted to brave warriors or heroes. Monotheistic religions consider anthropolatry as a superstition. Well, they would consider it as paganism. But that is your formal philosophical definition of anthropolatry. So when you say the man Jesus, this human being, is God, that's what you get. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is because this is Christianity is turned into a Jesus cult. Christ is gone, the Trinity's gone. I mean, I don't see any real Christianity here. And what I do is I quote in here this, and see how you people answer these questions here. I saw a documentary once, and maybe some of you have seen it too. It was about a woman. She was from Berkeley, wouldn't you know, in California, full of radicals. Anyway, it was a young woman who, it was on she made this, what they call the Hajj, this pilgrimage that Islam, Muslims make to Mecca. And this was about a woman doing it. You know, so often we see documentaries on men doing this. Well, this was a woman going. And so they showed her, and I'd say she's in her 30s, and they showed her in this kind of thing. And then they kind of, I don't know if they sat down with her. I think they did, because she was right there on the TV. And they said, well, now, how you know, she's a blonde Westerner. And they said, well, how did you happen to become a Muslim? How did that happen? She said, well, I was born and raised a Catholic. No. Okay. I was born and raised a Catholic. And she said, you know, when I got older, I started looking around for, you know, more spiritual life. I wanted to cultivate the spiritual life. And so I decided I was going to go around to these look into these different religions. And I would take it to Hinduism and Buddhism and Judaism and maybe, obviously, Islam. And she said, and when I got to the Islamic people and asked, you know, about their spiritual life and everything else, well, and the first things evidently they said to him, and they said, I think they asked her, do you believe Jesus is God? I don't remember what she said. But they said, if you believe Jesus is God, then how do you explain his praying to God? Was he praying to himself? And they asked several questions about, you know, Jesus and his appeal to God and what Jesus even said about God. And it's, how can you say, you know, like, what's this about? And so I would put it to other people. And I'm saying, I would put it like the Islamic people, to all of Christianity. If you think Jesus is God, well, who is he praying to? Who is he one with? Who is, you know? And, oh, you can take so many quotes from the Bible in which Jesus talks about God all the time. So how do you explain this if Jesus is God? Well, I mean, it should stop. Everybody should really stop and think about this. All I can tell you is that this woman, she was convinced it wasn't. And she was convinced that her Christianity that believes that Jesus is God, well, they were all wrong, all wet. And so she became a happy Muslim. And she was a happy Muslim. And how many other people have also had the same impression there? If to be a Christian means I'm supposed to believe in Jesus. I discovered that at the age of about 6 or 7, when it suddenly dawned on me that people actually believed this man was God. Well, I had already seen God. I already knew God. And I said, no way, no human being's God. Absolutely not. And then I thought to myself, well, that means I'm not a Christian. And I thought, well, okay. And I thought, I don't know what I am. Well, for years I thought I should be Jewish. When I found out they didn't believe Jesus was God either. So this is, and then there's, and in the book I give other examples of this kind of thing here. Like the monk that said to me, you know, we were talking about the Eucharist. And it was after Mass, and I said, I won't give his name. And I said, you know, it's just, the Eucharist is such a marvelous, you know, this is how we're transformed into Christ. All of a sudden he looked at me and he said, women can't be transformed into Christ, only men. Well, you know what? I reminded him of St. Paul saying that in Christ there's neither man nor woman or slave or master. This is Stoicism. This wasn't Christianity. This is not Judaism. This is not this all male dominant thing. This is Stoicism. Stoicism made no, you know, that all those differentiations of people and gender and who they were slaves and all that, knock them out. That had nothing to do with the truth. Stoicism gave us that. They were not into individual who I am and everything else here. They, you know, they just had a whole different view. Thanks be to God that Paul took a whole lot from Stoicism. Some of the best sayings that we have are pure Stoicism. And this was that world religion at the time of Christ, So, and I have other examples too in this book of how many people, you know, the problems of focusing on the man Jesus as Christ. And now he became Christ, no question about that. And God gave us this example, this model here. But I would take it also with a grain of salt. I was thinking last night, what I remember, somebody reminded me that I dropped, after I said a question, after kind of going over what we've been going over, a question people have, does this mean if God's plan was to save everybody, to save all of creation, does this mean everybody is saved here? And I thought, well, I want to bring that up again when we go over this difference between belief and faith, because they're very different here. But you know, I forgot the whole thing I wanted to bring out before I brought that out about is everybody saved here. I lost my train of thought in there. Well, this is not unusual for me. Can anybody remember that? Yes, Stoicism did this for us. Yes, which is true. Well, I can't remember the point I wanted to make about that. So we're just, you know, when you get that one, you forget something, you just quit it. And maybe it'll come up some other time here. Anyway, because we were on how Christ is still with us. You know, after going over this mystery of Christ, very briefly, really, there's no end to this subject of Christ. Absolutely, I'm telling you, there's no end. But we got to make an end someplace. We can't sit here for, you know, another 10 years discussing this whole thing here, because it goes beyond 10 years. It'll consume your whole life. It can. But anyway, Christ is a problem. And this is what I remember telling somebody that Christ was always a problem for me. But it had nothing to do with my revelation, what God gave me to reveal about Christ. This is my everybody's eternal oneness with God. My problem was, how does this line up with the party line? Are you with me? The party line is how Christ is presented in Christianity. It just never, what God revealed to me about Christ. Very little of it ever fit in to this whole party line here. So that was a problem here. you just keep it to yourself and keep going, because there's enough truth in the party line that I can go with. But because that Trinity, that's everything. And of course that Eucharist, that's everything. Pretty much I would say Christianity is actually can be very simple, even though I think it's the most mystical, because you got to keep going here. You just can't be content. You've got to see how this whole Trinity works in your life here. So after the incarnation, I was pointing out to you these three states, prior to the incarnation, Hilary's 3 states in the life of Christ here. And after the incarnation, after the resurrection, and the transformed spiritual body, in which Paul thought that matter was made spiritual. There was a lot of fathers, I got to tell you, a whole lot of the fathers thought that what underlined all matter was, even this, what underlined it was spiritual. At the bottom, we're always looking for the true nature of matter. And at bottom it is spiritual. Meaning, it's non-matter, whatever that is. So it underlined it. Many of the fathers thought that. Many of the fathers. The philosophers, it's so interesting to me, because the philosophers thought that it was eternal. They thought matter was eternal. They, and they still believed in this ultimate one. So in a way, they kind of have almost 2 beliefs there, that matter was somehow eternal. Can neither, it's not created or uncreated. It's just something that is here. And of course, they all wanted to find out what prime matter was, what started this whole thing here. And some had the idea, well, it was fire, started the whole thing. That was a Stoics view. And some thought it was water. Some thought it was earthy, something earthy here. And what was that 4th one? You have fire, air. Some kind of ethereal air that was prime, that was here first and foremost. And that, started its evolution, you might say, or its manifestation, whatever this is here. Anyway, so after the ascension, how is Christ present with us here? This was the Eucharist. Christ's transubstantiated heavenly body, totally changed. We're talking here about the human nature totally changed, but totally in its oneness with God. So Christ with us today is not the historical Christ of yesterday. The Eucharist with us today is not the historical Christ of yesterday. The man Jesus died, his humanity eternally transformed, deified, ascended, and glorified. That was his human nature. All the fathers believe in this glorious, a man's human nature totally glorified. The man people knew 2,000 years ago is no longer with us. Now there is only the living, heavenly, Eucharistic Christ, with us forever and accessible to one and all until the end of time. Our end is to be transformed into the same heavenly, eternal Christ. Just as bread is changed into our body, so too, this was what Augustine said, his view of the Eucharist. He said, just as bread is changed into our body, so too, when we eat the bread of life, our body is changed into Christ's heavenly body. Now, for 7 years, I was a Eucharistic minister in my church, and I would go every week. It seemed to me I went twice a week to the local hospital, non-Catholic hospital we have in Santa Monica there, and give out the Eucharist to people, Catholics in the hospital. And I always said this before I gave the Eucharist to somebody. Well, we had some little prayers we would say at a time. And I'd always say this, Augustine, repeat that to everybody. Just as bread is changed into our body, so too, when we eat the bread of life, our body is changed into Christ's heavenly body. People really understood that. And I got to tell you this one situation, stop me if I've heard it before, but this I walked into a room one day, and there was a young man, AIDS patient, totally dying. He was skin and bones. In fact, he was gone the next week that I came back because I wanted to look him up again. And when I came in, he was Catholic, and when I came in, I said, I brought the Eucharist with you. And I said, you know, and I kind of repeated this here. All of a sudden, this young man, his face lit up, he sat up in bed, his body, and he said, you know what? He said, I knew this. He had a friend in the room. He said, see, I was trying to tell you this. This is it. He said, this is what I feel going on in my body. My body is getting ready for the resurrection. My body is being transformed. And the joy, I tell you, it lit up the whole room. I can hardly talk about it. But how he recognized that Eucharist and this whole transfigured body of Christ, and that was what was happening to him, how he looked upon his horrible, horrible disease and what was taking him away, that he had this beautiful view of it. It could only have come from God. And this just, well, I just want to pass on something very beautiful that I witnessed in my own life. This young man, I just can't talk anymore about that. So anyway, the Eucharist, let me see, the Eucharist reveals how our transformation works. We are consumed by God, so that in the end all will be all in God. In other words, how does, you know, it's a strange thing how wonderfully the Eucharist works. You know, we consume, just like he says, the bread here. But in turn, it's God who is consuming us. Now, how else could in fact, when we think about Paul saying that in the end God will be all in all, and some people just think that means God's going to be present in everybody. That's just so stupid. They're talking about everything. We're already all in God anyway. But what Paul meant, there's only going to be God left. This was all the fathers went to town on this saying of Paul's here, disagreeing about what it meant here. Because the earliest understanding of this was Paul saying that once Christ has saved everything, then there's not going to be any Christ. All we're going to have left is this Logos, the divine, the whole Godhead. And you know, no creation left. Nothing left to save. It's all been saved. This is how they understood Paul. That in the end, Christ is going to hand everything over, or the Logos, and saved everything that's incarnate, hand it over to the Father, and everything in the end is just going to be God. Just like it was before there was any creation, now it's all back in God. He's going to bring it all, sum it up, bring it all back to God here. So, that God will be, that God's going to be the only thing left. And of course this raises the question, well, how does God, you know, we don't even know how we came from God, much as how we would possibly God, you know, and we're all in God anyway. But as I said, it's a different dimension. We've already gone over that. But how could we all end up just as God here? Well, there's only one way. God consumes us. That's making us part of God, just like bread. First, you know, we eat God, you might say, and God eats us. I mean, it's a terrible way to put it, really. But we're talking about the consummation of everything. What's the consummation of our life? And the consummation of Christ. The consummation of everything. This is the end that Paul was talking about. Everything ends up in God, really in a way as God. Of course, I say this, for some people it sounds so devastating that in the end there's just going to be God. And I say, who cares? But for this reason, what God revealed to us, this is what we go on, that we're to be transformed into Christ. Once that's a fait accompli, or however you say it in French, once that is accomplished, who cares what happens? You're not going to be around to care. That all is returned to God. Look, our only concern is being transformed into Christ. What happens after that? It's not our concern. We don't care. I mean, who cares? This is up to God. If that's the way God wants it, so be it. But what we want is to be transformed into Christ. That's our calling. And that is sufficient. After that, however it goes for Christ in the end, that's how it's going to go for us. We're always there with Christ as Christ. So however that goes for Christ, it goes for everybody. So this would be consume. We're talking about consume. The Eucharist, Irenaeus, remember, born 125. And he said, and he got it from John's apostle. So don't start talking about these fathers. Yeah, there's a lot of people who just like to take the father church and toss them out. You know, there's some people who really think Christianity only started, with Martin Luther. With this whole Protestant Reformation. Prior to that, just throughout the whole history of Christianity. Luther never did that, by the way. Luther never, he was with the Father's Church. He strictly speaking, Luther never changed any of the theology of the church or anything else. He just hated that Pope. And of course, down the line, Lutheranism did change, but that wasn't Luther. And the Anglican Church, Henry V or whoever, the eighth, he just threw out the Pope too. They have the exact same theology as we do, the Anglicans, of those what you call the High Episcopal. I know some of these people. They're just, they're basically Catholic, except for the Pope. Instead of the Pope, they have the Queen. Isn't that give me a break. But anyway, the Eucharist. So anyway, we're pretty close. I just throw out Calvin. That guy was nuts. The Eucharist is the divine Logos becoming incarnate in us, transforming our human nature to bring about the same oneness between its divine nature and our human nature that is Christ. We are not transformed into some other human being or some other person, such as historical man Jesus. Rather, the Logos recapitulates in us the same divine oneness. Now, I have some beautiful quotes in here about this. That the incarnation, that the very same incarnation that went on to create Christ or gave us Christ, that same thing is going on in us. God is transforming our soul and our body right into Christ. It's the same thing. And of course, the vehicle for this was this Eucharist. This is Christ still with us. And this is what God's doing in us. And Irenaeus said, he said, the way this whole transformation thing, he said it's baptism in the Eucharist. That's it. Nothing else. That's it. That's all you need. That's what it's about. But let me see. Christ revealed but one human nature common to all. Thus we are one despite the multiplicity. So to the Eucharist, in being one in the many, transforms the many into the one. One Christ. There's just one Christ. And there are not millions of Christs in heaven, but one. The same one we're all to be transformed into. What do I have here? I don't know how. Going over these notes, I don't know what I meant to say. In the Trinity, the Logos is God's mystical body, the eternal form of the Godhead. In creation, I've got 1, 2, 3. That's one. In the Trinity, the Logos is God's mystical body, the eternal form of the Godhead. 2, in creation, all multiplicity comes from this eternal form, from the Logos. We've all come from this Logos, created by or through this Logos. And this is the cosmic body of Christ that's one with all creation. So we have the mystical body, we have the cosmic body. And in the incarnation, the Logos, eternal oneness with mankind, is the heavenly Eucharistic body of Christ. St. Augustine, it is said, reported, that when he gave the Eucharist, what we call the Eucharist, this host, the bread, the wine probably too, he would say to the people, when you go to receive it, he would say, receive what you are to become. receive what you are to become. Can you imagine some priest today handing out the Eucharist here at Mass and saying, receive what you are to become? They should, but I'm saying that you'll never get anybody to say a thing like that. He'd be reported to the Holy Office. That's how far off Christianity's gotten from the right track. Anyway, okay, so we have the mystical body and the cosmic body and the Eucharistic body. And as we say, well, here I mentioned the sign of the cross. This cosmic body of Christ is throughout all, the Holy Spirit is in all, and the transcendent is above all. That's the sign of the cross that means to me. The Spirit is solely individual. Oh, this is a good thing to bring up. The Spirit is solely individual and exclusive. That Spirit dwells in everybody one-on-one. Very personal and exclusive. It's on a one-to-one basis, the Holy Spirit is. Okay. The Father is solely universal and non-exclusive. We're all in the Father, and the Father transcends all. And it's non-exclusive. Do you understand that the Holy Indwelling Spirit is exclusive for you? That Father's not. The Father's not exclusive to you at all, ever, in any way. And in the Eucharist, Christ is both particular, individual, and universal at the same time. Both individual and yet exclusive and yet non-exclusive. Do you understand how the Eucharist brings together the other two? And being exclusive to you, or you, and yet it's the same universal for all of you. Are you with me there? It is particular and at the same time inclusive. It's exclusive and yet inclusive. It combines the two, whereas the Holy Spirit is only inclusive. Exclusive. And the divine transcendent is totally exclusive. That's just a very different way to look at this Trinity and how it works in our life. How it all works to bring us to God. This is it's just fantastic. And now, something else that we go into here. You probably have all heard of what we call the sacraments of the church, at least in the West here. And we all think of these as rituals, which is pathetic. But I want to tell you that the word sacrament is purely a Western view of it. The original church, the Eastern Orthodox, well, they were both original, but they were totally separated in this world. They called these, what we call sacraments, they have always called the mysteries of Christ. Like you're being baptized into the mystery of Christ, anointed with the mystery of Christ. You receive the mystery of Christ. This is all what they don't have these, it's more than some kind of a ritual. And I so wish that we had this, kept this in the Western church here, because a sacrament just sounds like a ritual. And to tell you the truth, sometimes it's just conducted like a ritual. And it's not. These are sacred. This is the mystery of Christ, and that should be so impressed on us. That's we've got, you see, once you start saying that man Jesus is Christ, well, where's the mystery in that? I don't see any mystery in that. To me, that's just plain idolatry. So, this Christ is just not in Christianity. Anyway, I was just saying that we kind of recapitulate some of these mysteries in his own life. Remember, Jesus himself was baptized, and this was the second appearance, you might say, of the Trinity in the Gospels. First we have Luke, and then we have this baptism. Was this dove sat on his head? There's a Father, and then according to some, well, here we got the Son here in the river. And of course his confirmation. This confirmation is like Pentecost. He said he was going to give us his same Spirit, right? That's what Pentecost is. I'm sending you my Spirit. No, there we have his Spirit. This is, I hate it to be called confirmation. The Eastern Orthodox have it right. The day the baby is your infant, they plunge him into this water. Oh, I've seen it. It's pretty spectacular. And but it's warmed. Plunge him into this water, and they stick the whole head under. And bring him back and anoint him, wipe that off and anoint him, and then give him the Eucharist, this mashed up or whatever, the liquidified, the Eucharist. All those three mysteries of Christ given to that infant at once. Oh, that's the way we should do it. That's the way well, my view. Of course, as a Catholic, that's the church I want to do this kind of thing. I don't know how other people conduct all that. Don't ask me. But anyway, this is how it should be. And it's so cute. I go to it's a Catholic church, but it's Eastern Rite. In other words, we got all the icons and the whole. It's just Eastern Rite. It's beautiful. It's a Greek or Russian Rite, the one I go to in St. Michael's in El Segundo, California. And Father Alexei, he is just an ordinary U.S. citizen here, became Eastern Orthodox. He didn't become Eastern Orthodox. He was Catholic with this rite. Oh, it's conducted so beautifully. And, they have their chanting. It's just everything. To me, that's real church. That's real sacred. This is the only way to conduct it. And now, what was I going to say now about this? The sacredness of it. I was going to say something here about the Eastern Orthodox here. It's just something that they have that we need. No. We were talking about here. It was just a simple thing, a stupid thing in a way. Anyway, I have watched little babies in their parents' arms going up for communion. You see, they were baptized immediately in the Eastern with that rite. And so they'll go up to communion with these little kids in their arms, and the little kid just goes, and he flips that wine in there. It's the cutest thing. Whereas our kids, well, we march them up there till they're at least 7 or 8 years of age in front of us, and, the Eucharistic minister will give them a little blessing kind of thing here. I mean, no, they have it right. They have it right. They have to know what they're doing, and making them wait till they're 7 or 8, it's almost too late. I don't know. We can't get them early enough. But anyway, then we have this, what we call this mystery of forgiveness and everything else. We have that as one of our sacraments, and that's the mystery of Christ. Always beginning and intimacy. His union is our union. Of course, in the Eucharist, Christ united with one and all. His union is our union with God. And reconciliation, what we call here, we used to call it confession. This is just the forgiveness of sin. It's really more than that. I often refer to it as a new beginning. That's where you're just going to wipe this, forget everything, forget your past. And now start all over again. And then, of course, you have marriage. This is a problem in Christianity. They don't do a good job on marriage. Christ is the bond that unites every couple. And, of course, his first miracle was at this marriage business. And, of course, here I'm thinking of mystical marriage here. And then we have, I'm just going over the sacraments here that they've called the mysteries here. And just showing some relationship in the life of the Jesus, showing his life. This baptism, his sending his Spirit to us, is actually the ultimate, his ultimate transformation being the Eucharist. And, of course, his forgiveness. I often say the Jews always believed God forgave us. Anyway, we didn't need Christ for any forgiveness. But I really think that he stressed that we should forgive one another. It wasn't, okay, God forgives you, so what? You got to forgive one another. It's not complete. So God forgives you. That means nothing. You really would like to be reconciled with your brothers and sisters. And then, of course, you have marriage, which, in my view, I think it is beautiful, though. I tell you, the example of marriage that I had in my parents, brother. And, of course, marriage does cement. I got to tell you, that whole sacrament, it forms a bond there. And for the rest of your life, you're going to have it unless God releases you from the bond. Just being divorced isn't going to do it. Nothing. You walk away from it, not going to release you. There is God, because this marriage, it was really made, God is the one who binds it together. My parents used to describe that to me kind of this way. But they both agreed. My parents were both of them, in their own way. One Protestant, one Catholic, in their own way, raised very religious, wonderful people, young. And when they were 23 and 25, respectively, that's when they found each other. But they both went, when they thought about marriage, it was very serious for them. They just weren't. Of course, I think my dad was infatuated. And he admits that. Well, you know, as an old man, he used to say to me, he was so cute, he said, well, you know how you feel when you first fall in love with somebody and you're first attracted to them and you just want to be with them and everything? He said, I've never lost that for your mother. Never lost that feeling. It's kind of amazing when you think about that. Most couples go through that loss, and then come back to a deeper level. He got to the deeper level from day one. Really, nobody else would have put up with the man. Now, he was problematic, the most complicated human being you'd ever want to. He had so many levels. So many levels. He was brilliant, though. He tried to get hold of it. And with the grace of God, boy, he was really a religious person. He was a devout one in the family, and not my mother. You would think of women are devout, but boy, that was my daddy. But anyway, they said this before they were married. They had this pact here. They had a pact, and they said, "Look, the only person. We're always going to put God before each other. We're putting God. For example, she said, I told your father, I'm putting God before you. God comes first in my life, and then you." And he said, too, same way. They made this bond here. And by that, what they meant was, if I think something's against God, or and I think this is for God, in other words, this was their first consideration in everything. And their whole lives. And I'm sure that came into play a lot of the times in their life, about putting God first, even before the views or the desires or maybe something of somebody else. But they understood it. And they knew that it was a bond. They used to say, like a triangle. Here's, here is, just think of it as a triangle. This is the way they thought of it. Here is my dad, or the man. Here's the woman. And this is God. God is the one. They're both one with God. And what unites them to each other is this. Now, are you with me? This is really beautiful. This God binds them together here. This is uppermost. This is first and foremost. And this was the bond between them. But this was their first bond with God, both to the one God, and then their bond between each other. This is basically how they described it to me. I just, it's a strange thing. My parents had such an ideal marriage that the four of us kids, we all got together and we all admitted they ruined marriage for us, because that wasn't the way our marriages went at all. Quite the opposite. So, when you expect marriage to be something this lovely and wonderful and just great and spiritual and everything else, and then you go out into the world, you just automatically have these expectations, And we all said, yeah, it wasn't nothing like mom and dad's. It's just nothing like this. And so, as we all said, they ruined marriage for the rest of us. Because when you have that kind of example, somehow that's all you know about it. Although sometimes I remember meeting I used to go with some kids who either being raised basically by their mother and had no father there. And they used to think, oh, how lucky I am, you know, that I have a daddy, that I have my parents. I used to feel very lucky that my parents were together. In fact, my best friend, Sally, she didn't have a daddy around either. No, just incomplete. Your life is incomplete if you don't have a mom and dad. Anyway, a bug. So anyway, this, and of course we have this, and the priesthood also, this is considered. Now this is very interesting. I often ask people, how would you say that you, now, you know, Jesus was never a priest. He wasn't a Levite or anything else. He was not a member of the clergy. That's something to always keep in mind. He was no priest. But he's regarded as the, what do they refer to him, the ultimate high priest or something like that. That these, you know, we have litanies of titles for Jesus and Christ and Almighty God and Mary, you name it. We just have titles and titles here. Anyway, he was the high priest or something like that. And but how are all of us, you know, we're talking here about these mysteries of Christ. How are all of us, strictly speaking, part of this priesthood? Well, how are we, to some extent, priests? What does a priest do? What is his function? What does he do? Well, he's the one in Judaism and even in Christianity. And you know what? There's priests in a lot of different, they even have priests in Hinduism that run the temples, and, you know, what do they do? It's all the same thing, what we mean by a priest. They even have priests in Buddhism. They're more or less functionaries, you might say. But what are they doing? They're the ones who are presenting or making these sacrifices to God, are they not? That is their major function, is to sacrifice, offer a sacrifice to God. And I think that's why they call Jesus or Christ a high priest, something like that. Because what did he give for God? What did he sacrifice? His whole being. His whole being. Sacrifice to God. We look upon his death as somewhat sacrificial. Of course, I think they got the wrong view of it. But this was a consequence of his giving his whole life to God. And it's going to be a consequence of your giving your whole life to God. In this, we are all priesthood, have a part in this priesthood, sacrificing our life to God. And this is exactly what Jesus did. Exactly. Whatever you think of the temple functionaries. But even there, they were to offer these sacrifices, you know, in Judaism. And I understand in Hinduism, they're the ones who go and place all the things that the people brought. They're kind of mediums between the people and the altar or the sacred whatever's up there to make this offering. They're the ones who kind of do this. And so we ourselves are really part of that. This is our priesthood. We offer ourselves the same as Jesus did here. Okay, then we have this, the last sacrament is, you know, once again, the Eastern Orthodox doesn't have 7 sacraments. They got a whole bunch of others. And they don't draw a line. You have to understand the Roman Church is full of laws and regulations. I mean, they make everything, they box everything in. Eastern Orthodox are a lot more, you know, open. They are. They don't come down hard on a lot of these things. Hear some of them talk, they do, but it's not really in their lineup. They're not Roman. Anointing of the sick and the dying. This has always been with us. Christ imparts his healing grace and the time of death, sacrament of compassion. This is that. And I thought I would tell you this too, that with regard to the Eucharist here, I want you to know that now, way back in my life, I researched and looked in this earliest understanding of the Eucharist and so forth, and how they started this, how they conducted this memorial meal, that the Last Supper that Jesus told them to do. and how this went. Well, they got to have so many people there. It just wasn't a simple supper here. And sometimes they have big feasts. And I kind of know how this goes. But I want to tell you something that came on very, very early. Oh, very early. They would, this was blessed bread here. And they looked upon it as very special bread from the beginning. Think of it what you will. But they were allowed, the families were allowed to take some home with them for people who could not attend the services, or for maybe some sick person. And also, it was given to people who, before they had to make some big journey. You know, in those days, big journeys were pretty dangerous, and they leave home, and you never know. They didn't have cell phones. So they would give them this bread for the journey. I've heard of cases where somebody died, and they would stick this little piece of bread of a dead body, stick it in their mouth, and wanted them to be buried with that. And from the beginning, I don't know of any time, to my knowledge, when they did not reserve this bread, put it on the side, in case they needed this during the week, or somebody wanted some of this bread here. So from the beginning, it was always what we call, they always had it on reserve, you know, from all the bread that they consecrated here. So that was put on reserve. Now this putting this on the reserve took on real meaning here, whereby you could go in there, somebody's dying, and get a piece, or to the kind of at the last type of thing here, or some. It's just like today. They will, in the anointing of the sick, they'll give them before somebody has a major operation today. That's kind of new. You don't wait till somebody's dying today. You're going to give them if they're really sick and have any possibility of maybe of dying. And that's pretty much what it was then too. But anyway, this reservation that's always been with the church, always. And so that's how we get this. The place of reservation was always in, well, my growing up. And I don't know when this started, when they had this tabernacle, leaving it right out. Well, the Western church, they would put it in the tabernacle and leave. That was the reserved Eucharist right there. And that was the presence of Christ. And that's what they believed. Now, the Eastern Orthodox, you know, they conduct their services behind a screen. But they also reserve the Eucharist. You go into, now the Eastern Orthodox only have Mass on Sundays. They don't have, like the Catholic Church, you know, three Masses a day. I think we got 4 at St. Monica's, 4. We have a noon. I think they still have I know they have a 7 and 8, but then 5:30 in the afternoon, I'm not too sure. Maybe it's only sometimes of the year. But anyway, we have Masses practically going on around the clock. And the Eastern Orthodox doesn't, but nevertheless, they have that reserved back there. This is just the tradition. And from their earliest days, that this is something to think about. This isn't something new. And see, I was raised with that, this presence in the tabernacle. And I'm going to tell you, I experienced that. The presence of God when I'd open up a Catholic door of some church. There was a warmth there that I knew. And I would open up Protestant church doors, you know, like kids, and look in. There's an empty hall. There might be some picture of Christ sweating out in the garden or something. That was an empty hall to me. I never found God in there. And so anyway, in my own prayer life, that it would never have occurred to me to go and, well, of course, you know, you can say your prayers in your room, this kind of thing here. But to really, my dad always went to every day and made a visit to the Bućan, just quietly, being there with God. He went all the time. And I was raised with that. And anytime my mom got a chance, she used to say when the kids were young, she never had a chance to pray. She was always so busy. But that's why, for me, I want to tell you something. and we were talking about this morning here, that Father Keating and his whole prayer life seems to me, I don't really understand centering prayer, but you're always looking into yourself. Looking into yourself. Find that center, find God within yourself here. And you know what? I'm glad I wasn't raised with any of that. Because for me, I knew God within myself. But I didn't see any point in, you know it, so what? And I never thought, to me, to focus on the inside. I never did in my whole life. Never focused on the inside. I wasn't one that was set to, sink in looking inside ever. And I was raised with that Eucharist, that presence. Just like looking out at the logos in nature. For me, I looked out constantly. For me, this was an object. Christ was an object. And that's why I was very surprised when Christ was revealed as that in me that was one with God. That's surprising because that was within. But I understood how that worked. And I used to think the God in me, the one that knows that Eucharist, that knows that divine, that's God. Here was a Trinity. I mean, the whole thing makes so much sense to me because of the Trinity. Just that it's God in you that knows God. It's God in you that reveals God. And in turn, that reveals us. Like you consume that Eucharist, in turn, God is revealing God to you. The whole Trinity is just involved in this whole thing, I can't tell you. So anyway, this is the beauty of the Eucharist. That was the center of my spiritual life and my prayer life, too. I never went off and sat someplace or did all that stuff. I'd make it to church. I could spend all day in church. And with the Blessed Sacrament, in that presence. Because it meant to me, a lot of people are going around looking for that presence. Where's that presence? Is it in me? Is it in nature? Everything else. I would go before that tabernacle, and there's the presence. It's just there. And let me tell you this cute story. I once read the life, when I was a kid even, of the Curé of Ars, Curé de Ars. And he's a French little priest. He was not very intelligent. Evidently, they didn't think he was anyway. And he wanted to be a priest, of course. But they didn't know whether to ordain him or not because he just didn't seem to get it. I guess the theology or whatever they were teaching in those days. And they thought, what are we going to do with him? Should we ordain him or not? And they said, oh, we'll ordain him and just send him out to the boonies. The stupid people out there. I mean, he could at least be a functionary and do something here. They just not thought highly of him at all. Well, I'll tell you, he had some real special graces from God. I mean, he was a real saint. He had the discernment of souls, what we call discernment of souls. He knew if you just appeared in front of him, he knew all about you and your spiritual status and everything else, one of those. And people came from all over. But anyway, he in the report of his own life, he said this is his story that he reported. He said, every day I would go to the orphanage and, visit the children and the people there at the orphanage. And every day, the way to the orphanage, I would pass by the church. And the church door was open. And every day I would go there, I would see this man sitting all alone there. And I'd come home 3 or 4 hours later, and he was still sitting there. And day after day, he just saw him for a long time. Finally, he thought to himself, I'm going to ask him someday. And he saw him after Mass one day. And he said, I don't remember if they gave his name or not. And he said to this man, what do you do in church all this time? What do you do? And the man just said, oh, I look at God and God looks at me. That's what he said. That's the answer he got. I just look at God and God looks at me. So much for the presence of God in the Eucharist. So much for this presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And to say that you just look at God and God looks at you, I mean, talk about contempt. Of course, the curé knew that this man was, it blew his mind too. This man was, I don't like to say advanced, I don't like those words, but he had a real grace that God had given him there. It's just wonderful. It's a beautiful little story. And I remember because I love the Eucharist too, and I could sit there just like this man. I mean, I identified with that little story. It's really cute. I might as well pass it on. But anyway, then when we get down here, This is what Christ did 2,000 years ago and is still doing today. We're talking about this mystery of Christ, how we enter into this, and both through marriage and even through that priesthood of the offering and sacrifice of ourselves. It all goes in. It's all connected. It says, though God can give grace wherever he likes. Yeah. Now you see the belief in both Eastern and Western churches, that this is a Christian belief, that these mysteries, these sacraments, are the vehicle, the mediums of God's grace. They believe that. That is one of that's bottom level. Absolutely. This is how God works in us. We live through these. We participate in this. We pay attention that this is God's grace in the soul working in us. And it says, though God can give grace wherever God likes, the sacraments are man's certitude of this gift. Thus we do not know where God is not, but we do know where God is. And this is in the sacraments, in these mysteries. The sacraments do not depend upon experience. Are you with me there? That is so important here. You know, we talk about all these mystical experiences and everything else. The sacraments confer grace without any experience. You don't have to wait to experience that. Also, as I say, you know, I regard these mysteries as God setting up a little fountain, of grace. And so it's like saying, where will I go to find God? What's my path? What can I do? And this kind of thing. Well, this whole setup here of these mysteries and these sacraments, this is telling you where you know you can get God's grace, how it's going to work. This is the mode, you might say, of our transformation. This is the way that Christianity looks upon this. And I think, you know, even Protestant sects, they've got their things that you do here. Think of baptism, that's huge for them. And I think confirmation is huge for them. I mean, everybody really understands this as a medium of grace for us. And so what is grace? And I think some thing down here we describe this. Now, grace defined, it is defined, there's only one definition of it. Grace is the very essence of God. Grace is God. The very essence of God. It's not some favor or some little thing you're going to get here. This is the essence. This is God imparting its life to you. And the more, well, I don't like to put it accumulative, but the more we get out of the way, the more this grace can take over. Are you with me? It's not like accumulating, you know, piling up all these graces. It's silly. But as much as we can take now, then from these mysteries, that's to the good. Now, the more that we can get out of the way, the more that grace is going to fill us and transform us and influence us. And so this is pretty much considered in Christianity, these reliving of, you know, in many ways, Jesus' own life, his baptism, his presence here and there, his Holy Spirit given to us, and ultimately his own ultimately transformed body. I mean, you know, we are recapitulating his life and forgiving others and sacrificing our life, just like he did. We are recapitulating his life. These are the mysteries of his life. And we're recapitulating these here. So, you know, even though, but somebody will say, well, I don't go to this church, I don't believe in any of that or anything else. Does that mean that, you know, I can't be transformed or I can't be saved or anything else? As I said, nobody can tell you where God is not. Nobody can tell you what God will or will not do. Nobody can tell you that. But one thing that we were left, that Christ left us here, is we can tell you where God is. We can't tell you where God isn't. Nobody can tell you that. God can be here or there with somebody, give us grace. Anybody. But we do know, if we're looking and want to find, we do know where God is. God just didn't leave us and say, well, I was here for a few days, a little while, now I'm gone. No. We know exactly where to go, where God is. And this is pretty much, I'd say this is the Christian belief. Certainly it is in the Orthodox, is what we consider the Eastern and Christian Western Orthodoxies. Okay. Oh, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to explain this here. I made a little note here. That when we say you don't have to experience any of this, God's grace is not an experience. Well, it can be to some extent. But I wouldn't count an experience to be a real sign of God's grace. I'm not so sure that it is. There may be something apart from that. The experience, now this is, I kind of like this. I don't know who said this. I believe this, I think it's the Stoics possibly. But they're saying, and Aristotle too, that somehow we're talking about this ultimate cause, God as the uncaused cause. And the fact, they figured out, I think this is pretty philosophical, the fact that the cause is in the effect. Now try and think of that. Whatever causes, whatever the cause is, it is in the effect. And I tend to think of grace as God is the cause, and it's in the effect too. God is in that effect. How it affects us, how it transforms us. That's in the effect. And the experience can be, if the experience, John of the Cross was always saying about all people and their paranormal experiences and all that junk. He's saying, get rid of them. Don't pay any attention to them. You're just a fool if you give it any inch in your life. Get them out of your life. He said, even if they come from God, don't pay any attention to them. Even if they come from God. And he said this. He said, that's because that's just, people get caught up in their experience of something. He said, you're caught up in the effect, whereas you just have to go with the cause. He made a distinguishing there, though. He said that what you experience is nothing but the effect, whereas the reality of this thing, that's God and that's the cause. So you don't need any effect to have God. God is the cause, and God will do what God's going to do. But your little experience of that is beside the point. You have that effect in you. This is God in you. And your experience of it is irrelevant. And in fact, if you go on that, you may be very much deceived. He was afraid of tremendous deception, because people interpret their experiences. They make a whole lot out of it. And I read it of John of the Cross. Boy, he came down on hard on all this, which is why he and St. Teresa didn't get along with each other, because she was all into her vision and voices. And here he comes, one of her closest friends, and he really admired her and loved her, He didn't say she was fake or anything else like that. But he knew better. And it's true. All these people with their visions and voices, it's a head trip. And because grace is, I would say probably some of our greatest graces are non-experiential. Non-experiential. Is it possible to see grace? Oh, absolutely. Just the Eucharist. Listen, I know a girl who went out after our retreat, and she was so impressed with all this business here, she became a Catholic. Well, I warn people just not to do that. But they don't listen to you. So she became a Catholic, and then some years later, I got a letter from her, and this is what she told me. She said, all that you received and the way you talk about the Eucharist, and it's so wonderful. She said, I went to communion. I became a Catholic just so I could go to communion, and, I wanted this too, like what you have. And she said, I went to communion every day for 1 year and had no experience at all. So I left. She went after some Krishnamurti guy, became his secretary. Who was that guy? Had no head or something? I don't know. He says she went off to somebody else there. So there you go. What was her mistake? If you're into something, hoping you're going to have some experience, discount yourself immediately. You're in it for yourself, that's your little ego, and God doesn't play with forget it. Just forget it. God isn't our valet, just there to please your ego and give you experiences. And people, if you're in it to reach some state, I don't know if it's silence or anything you're in it for yourself, discount the spiritual life, a true spiritual life. You've got to be in this for God, and only for God. And you can say, well, we make that choice because we think it's best for ourselves, and that I will countenance. That's as far as you can go. That's our choice for God. But anything else that you expect from God, that you want from God, or that you think you're going to be great because of this, you're not going to get any place. You will not get any place. You've got to get over this. That your love for God has to be greater than yourself, greater than a love for, anything you want for yourself. But I do think, though, that you can't kind of get that position until you've had some real graces from God, because you're so appreciative. I remember used to saying that, I just wanted to live my life for God without getting anything from God, because that was the only way that I knew how to prove I wasn't in it for myself. And I got to tell you, that's pretty hard. Because somehow we do want a little feedback, we want a little pat in the back, we want to know we're getting someplace. And I can tell you, that's hard to get rid of. It's hard. As I call it, tough love. Love of God is tough love. But if you're determined to do that, and you don't go around expecting this and that and the other thing, it'll happen. Because this is totally for whatever you do. And you say, I don't want this for myself. And that's why it's kind of interesting. I was a Disc House Carmelite, and of course I knew them when I was 10, and I wanted to enter the monastery with them. I thought, as soon as I was old enough, and because I thought they had a good life. And Reverend Mother, in fact, she asked me why I would like that to enter in life, and I said, because it's a good life. I couldn't think of a better life. And it had nothing to do with God, believe me. Believe me, I had nothing to do with God. And but I like the idea of having my own bedroom, which I didn't have at home, having a garden, which I didn't have at home, not having to eat meat, which I hated. So for all these odd reasons, I thought, oh, that's the life in there, with the cloistered sisters. And of course, she laughed, and I said, because it's a good life. And she said. How'd she say? Well, she said it, because I said to her after that, I said, well, what's hard about this life, after she told me about it? And she said, well, to tell you the truth, it's not hard for those who love God. For those who love God, it's a good life, it's an easy life. And that just hit me awful, because I didn't love God. And I didn't want to tell her. But I did ask her, I said, well, how about those who don't love God? It's still a good life, And she said, oh, if you don't love God, you wouldn't last here more than a few weeks, a month maybe. She said, anybody who thinks they're coming in here to get something for themselves, she said, they'll maybe last a couple months. And that's it, you can't. She said, our vocation, we come in here and sacrifice what we do and live the lives that we do, not for ourselves, but our vocation is to pray for the world. We give our whole life to God for the good, hoping, praying. This is our vocation for the whole world, that God will bestow graces for people in the world. Nobody's in here for themselves. She made that very clear to me at the age of 10. And I thought, well, that's, looking back on it, as a 15-year-old wanting to enter, I thought that's great. That's the only attitude to have. That you're willing to give up your whole life, not for your good, but for everybody's good. Just, the idea of being in something for the whole world, really, it's great. It's the way to live. For everybody. And not just for yourself. And that really helps in the monastery life. Because if you think, oh, I'm just here for myself, praying for myself, well, oh, give me a break. No, this is larger than life. It's larger than you. And all monasteries are that way. All, if you understand the religious monastic orders here. And they're not in there for themselves. It is for all of us. And they provide so many, well, I'm not going to go into the monastic life. Anyway, I just want to briefly go over this, and maybe we'll have a little break. And I got to get this faith that this is everything here. And then maybe, if you like, we can take some questions, but I'm just going to finish this right now. The mystery of Christ is summed up. It's summed up in the Eucharist here. And I just thought we would bring it to, I just have some notes here to call attention to you. This is the one and the many, the whole mystery of how the many are one and the one are many. It just says Christ is one, yet multiplied infinitely. The many hosts are the one same Christ. Now reverse this. If the one is many, then the many are one, which means multiplicity is actually one. In the end, there's only Christ, only one body. There is no multiplicity or multiple bodies. One in all and all in one. The Eucharist is this. This is what it's telling you. This is its mystery. Another thing it's resolving. I mean, this is what the philosophers were going over. How can the many be one? How can the one be many? This was a big philosophical question for the philosophers, if you know your Greek philosophy. This was huge. And here's this little Eucharist. It's all in there. That's the answer there. How the one are many, and the many are one. And here you have something else. Appearance is not reality. The senses and the rational scientific mind only know bread, but the reality is Christ's resurrected immortal body. Thus what we see is not it. So too the body we see and experience is not it, not our eternal body. The body you see and experience is not it. And the body that this Eucharistic Christ, its body is what you see, and that bread is not it. And it's not the body that you know either. So too, the body we see and experience is not our eternal body. To know the true body, we do not need the mind and the senses. So in heaven, these would be of no use. Well, I could really take off here. What good are the senses in heaven? You know, people talk about the resurrected. You know, what's a body anyway? It's just a sensory. But without the body, you don't have your five senses. But what good is the five senses going to do you in heaven? First of all, here on earth, your five senses, they don't see God, right? You can't see God with your senses here. And, well, so what are they good for in heaven? I'd like to know. Well, you see, they're good to eat, to smell, to see physical objects. This is people's crazy idea of heaven. They're on some planet someplace. I can't get over it. It's just, you know, man has been defined as a rational being. And I want to tell you, man is not a rational being. I'm absolutely convinced. Few people use their reason. Man is an emotional, feeling being. He bases everything on how he feels and how it's going to affect his feelings. It's not based on reason. I don't know any religion that's really based on man's rational mind. Certainly not Christianity in some respects. Christianity in itself is above all that. But in other words, I wish that it did drive with rationality, because we have so much in it that's not. Okay, to know the true body, we do not need the mind and the senses. So in heaven, these would be of no use. In heaven, our eternal body should be Christ's one body. It's the Eucharist. As Augustine said, receive what you are to become. That Eucharist is our hypostatic oneness with God forever. We're going to be transformed into that Eucharist. This is Christ. This is the eternal, everlasting Christ. And that's what we're going to be transformed into. So where is heaven? This is another thing this is something else that the Eucharist does for us. Where is heaven? After his ascension, Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father in heaven, so everybody believes. There must be some chair up there. The Eucharist, then, is where heaven is. If this is Christ, then this is heaven. Since heaven is beyond space and time, the Eucharist is not in different places, in some, but beyond space and time. Heaven, then, is here and now because there is no time and space in heaven. In other words, if you want to know where heaven is or what's that like, this Eucharist dwells in this heavenly estate, and it's right here with us. This is where heaven is, right here with us. And this is what the Eucharist is telling us. There isn't some big chair up there with this man sitting on it, or whatever they think it is. I don't get this sitting at the right hand of God. I don't even know who said it. But the thing is, we know this Eucharistic, this eternal Christ, and this heavenly, glorified Christ. And this is the Eucharist. And that's where heaven is, if you have to point to it. But that's the dimension. Not that, not up there, or out here, or later down the road someplace, after some kind of destruction of the earth or whatever people are expecting. All right, now I call this the technique. I always say that in Christianity we don't have techniques. There's no such technique as you can practice to be one with God. And I always say there's only technique we have in Christianity is the Eucharist. The Eucharist focuses us inward or outward, either in the reserved Blessed Sacrament or inward, as subject or as object. The Eucharist can be an object to us, or could be subjectively in us. Both sides of the coin here. Both sides of consciousness are pleased with the Eucharist. They get in there. God is closer to me than I am to myself. As the resurrected Christ, Jesus is without self. Thus we supply the human self or consciousness of Jesus. I often thought this, the reason I put this in here, because that was when very often, I was not into the Jesus business. But when I received the Eucharist, I used to think, well, just as Jesus' body supplied the humanity for the incarnate Christ, now my body is supplying the humanity for this incarnation of Christ. That's why I say that that I used to think of myself as supplying this, the self or the whatever you want to call it, my own being. And it gives us the certitude of union with God. Now the Eucharist, this is something else. Anybody receives the Eucharist, I would like to ask them afterwards, are you one with God? Now, what should be your response after you receive that Eucharist, oneness with God? Of course. You don't have to strive for some mystical marriage or some transforming union or some ecstatic estate. You know when you receive that Eucharist, you are one with God. It's an affirmation of it. You just have to grow in that. But you already are. And the Eucharist is telling us that. I'm telling you, this is why the Eucharist is the only Christian technique that we have. It gives us a certitude of union with God without any need for experience or attaining some mystical state. Union is not our doing anyway. This is God's doing, and God's doing us in Christ's whole mystical body doing in us. Okay, now the fourth one here, the Eucharist, I have down recreation. Do this in remembrance of me means recreate me. And I've already gone over that with this Father Doug Grossman, the Jewish gentleman who went over, the priest, who went over what remembrance means to the Jews. It's very important to keep in mind what remembrance means to the Jews, because don't you sometimes feel we're overwhelmed with this whole Holocaust business, and, they can't ever get over it? Do you ever have that feeling? I have. You hear so much about it, and they're constantly harping on everything. And that just is telling you, they don't mean remember the Holocaust. This is part of your heritage. This is just like Father Grossman. If his grandfather had not escaped Czechoslovakia, there wouldn't have been any Father Grossman. He wouldn't exist. He'd been hauled off to camp. Probably, who knows if he'd have been one of those survivors. But, so this is part of your heritage. You have survived. This is part of your history and your heritage. And don't forget it. And so it just means something else to Jewish people. It's not a remembrance. And this is what it meant to Christ. You recreate me. Represent me. And what was that? Relive me. Relive. You've got to relive it. Just as ordinary food is transformed into our body. Well, we went over that. And you know, another term for, if you look up remembrance, it's kind of interesting. Another term for remembrance is called mindfulness. Now, you know what? I don't know anything really about Buddhism. But I only know that that's one of their big precepts is mindfulness. They call it mindfulness. And you know, that's very mystical what they really mean by it. I remember reading the definition of that. And that's really to be, you know, that's living in the now. It has tremendous mystical implications here. The word mindfulness. See, even the Buddhists don't mean, oh, just remember something. I mean, to remember something is ridiculous. Anyway, it reveals, and then something else I wanted to bring out here, that the priest, before he consecrates the wine, put this little drop of water in, remember, and repeats Peter's prayer, just as God shared in our humanity. Now, we pray to share in God's divinity. That's the prayer that's said every day at every Mass here, that we share. And then, what's so interesting here, this little drop of water in the wine, it disappears in the wine, by the way. This is something else interesting. And then it's consecrated. Now, are you with me? We are in that life of Christ that is, you know, after the consecration, they believe that this is, well, I hate to say blood, but this is the life of Christ. Let's put it that way, because it's just all symbolic. But this is the real life of Christ. And we're already part of that. That's that water in there. We have been consecrated. Our human nature has been consecrated right along in there. There's no way you're going to separate us at all. And I just think it's a beautiful thing that they do. I wish they would bring it out more and really pound on that. And I have I have down here that the Eucharist, among revealing many other things, I've got down the Trinity. Oh yes, oh yeah. Well, this is what I found out. You know, I was always wondering about what is there in myself that sees God, knows God, loves God, is one with God. You're always wondering about these things. You know, you really don't know yourself, to tell you the truth. But anyway, I have down that it reveals a Trinity because, and this is kind of how it came about for me, that in us that knows and loves the Father is the Logos. That in you that loves God isn't you. It's God. And the flame of love that binds Christ, us, to the Father is the Holy Spirit. In other words, well, what I saw is that, of course, I saw that the true nature of that in you that is one with God, that is Christ. But then you come to find out that it isn't you at all, and that this is like the Logos that's one with the Spirit. I'm telling you the whole thing. You just there's no place for self. There's no place for self in anything in my whole life. There never was. And of course, self, because I could see, like on the spiritual dimension, that I could see that there was no place for me, and it was kind of amazing. That's why I was always wondering, well, isn't there anything about me that's one with God, that knows God, or anything else? It turns out no. But it's God in you that does all this. It's not you. And the flame of love that binds Christ, or us, to the Father is the Holy Spirit. I saw that. Each reveals the other, and none reveals itself, because in the Trinity there is no self. I keep harping on that boy, there's no person or self in the Trinity. Eschatology, the last things, yeah, that's something, you know, how can Christ come again when Christ is already here? This is something I don't understand. You know, we're all pounding on this Christ come again, this business. It's disgusting. It's a lie. There's no truth to it at all. And the church went and added this as a prayer after communion. You know, Christ come, what is it? Yeah, there's a prayer after communion, after the priest receives communion. I can't remember it now, because I refuse to say it. So I don't remember it. You know, I'm one of those. I'm not going to enter into that prayer, because it's a lie. And anyway, the second coming, Christ is already here. Eucharist transcends time. People are waiting for the end of the world. That's so crazy anyway. I said the Eucharist transcends all that time. Christ is still with us. Christ is with us. That's the whole point of part of my retreat called Christ Still With Us. Okay, and the Eucharist cuts through the so-called privileged souls. Privileged beings. You know, it's so interesting. I don't know about Paul. John, St. John, we know St. John, he received that Eucharist, didn't he? That is the very same Eucharist that you receive. No different. What St. John received. And Paul too. Paul also talks about the Eucharist. But the same one he received. The same one Irenaeus, whom I love. And the same one that all your favorite early fathers, all your favorite saints, St. Augustine, let's go up the line. And to Mother Teresa, and everybody, we all receive the very same Christ, same Eucharist. It isn't special for anybody. It's the same. And this has been from the beginning of the church. From the beginning, I hate to even call it a church. It sounds too specialized. From the beginning of Christianity, we all, this is just, and you know, across people, across nations, it just is everything. All differences are irrelevant, because in Christ there are no differences. God isn't concerned with that kind of thing. It's all very beautiful and everything, but it's all going to end up in Christ anyway. That's how God planned it. And so we want to be in on that. And so I just love that idea that, you know, we hear about these saints and some of their experiences, God and everything. But the Eucharist is the same for everybody. It's not different from somebody. And so, you know, the certitude of oneness with God does not depend upon any experience. And if you never go beyond that, as I say, I'm not too keen. I think that a lot of holy people in the world have never heard of any unitive state or anything else. And they're probably not in that unitive state. I don't know what the advantage of that is for good people who are good already. Except it kind of confirms them in their oneness with God. But there's so many people, that's not the essence of sanctity or holiness. I think probably the majority of holy people have never reached any mystical state whatsoever. Just on the goodness of their lives. And that's what's pleasing to God. Of course, I don't believe this hierarchy in heaven and all that stuff. But I mean, they're in a better position than many people searching out for some, glorious life here. Now, it says the secret of Christian mysticism is the Eucharist. It is not only the means, but it's the end itself. Because that's what all of us are to become. That whole Eucharistic Christ. Okay, so I think we'll have a little break here, and then we'll come back and get this one on faith. Okay? We're going to start here on the last paper of my handouts. This is the one of the, I talk 4 times usually during a retreat, and this is the last one. And when we're through going over it, I'll tell you why it is included in this retreat. Because you don't usually go on a retreat and expect to hear about this, what we call faith. And that is the name of this talk. And when we're through, I'm through going over this, I will tell you why it is particularly included in this retreat, why it is so very important here. So I think that, it was, Jesus said, it's because I told you the truth that you don't believe me. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, it means that the truth is really unbelievable, very difficult for people to really grasp here. And anyway, this is to some extent why we need faith, because you really cannot grasp the truth. Without faith, there really is no truth here. So, this is the paper, how it goes. I'm going to read to you off this paper here, and you'll have it yourself. Truth is unbelievable, as I say. You know, as Jesus said, because you see, you believe. But blessed are those who believe and do not see. Those who have the faith, they don't need to see. They don't need to see. Belief is different than faith. Now, when I went to look up the definition of faith, I want to tell you, I consulted, you name the book, and I consulted it. I don't care if it's a dictionary, an encyclopedia, religious theology books, everywhere I looked. Faith was defined this way. Belief. Well, as I said, I could not find a definition of faith that was not defined as belief. Let me repeat that. I've looked everywhere. I never found in existence a definition of faith that was not defined as belief. Belief in something. So, and I know that it's not. So, but I was looking to see if anybody had it right. So, this is what belief is. It is an intellectual assent, a reflective assurance. It is a conviction of propositions presented based on evidence. It is a reasonable assent to hold true what cannot be immediately verified. It involves intellect and even reason. Now let me read that again. It's an intellectual assent. You're saying yes to something. It's a reflective. You've thought about this. This is an assurance here. It is a conviction of some proposition presented, and it's based on some kind of evidence where somebody can say, see here, here's the proof, read this, or see that. It is a reasonable assent, reasonable, you think it makes sense, to hold true what cannot be immediately, verified. It involves intellect and even the reason. Belief always involves this. Belief is our own exercise, and thus it will always be subject to doubt and its reverse, which is unbelief or no belief. In other words, belief is not stable. We all know people who believed when they were little kids, or believed in something someday, and then they don't believe that anymore. They lost it. Like the young man I said who came to the door and he said, I don't believe in God anymore. At one time he did, and now he doesn't. Anything that we actually know does not require belief. And here I think of Carl Jung. He was asked, do you believe in God, or do you believe God exists? He said, I don't believe it. I know it. This was Carl Jung. And it was a little different to believe something and to know it. Thus, once we know something, there is no longer belief. Once you know it, but it's not a matter of just believing in it. Once you know something, you don't believe it. Belief then deals with the knowable, or what eventually can be known. And it is therefore relative. In other words, now you know it, now you don't. So it's relative. Belief is always relative. Some people believe this, some people believe that. One time you believe this, one time you don't believe that, or now you add on to more beliefs. So it's just relative. What can eventually be, is therefore relative. Faith, on the other hand, goes further, goes beyond anything that is knowable to the mind, to the intellect, or to consciousness. Faith deals with the unknown and the unknowable, the absolute, and thus faith is the absolute. We have the term unbelief, but we do not have the term unfaith. There's such a thing as unbelief or disbelief. There's no such thing really as unfaith or disfaith. We don't even have the term for that. And so faith then, let me see here. So faith, well, I'm going to go over it further on here. And I thought, well, You know, you can hear these things, and if they make sense to you, then you can believe them. Now, you see, and I'm thinking in my own life as a child, thinking over this whole Christian party line, I couldn't believe any of it. Now, because it didn't make any sense to me. It made no sense to me. So, in order to believe something, it has to make sense to you. I hope you're with me on that. In order to believe something, it's got to make sense to you. You've got to have some kind of, it says it's based on some kind of evidence or proof that you're going to proffer, bring forth, quote. And so you decide what you're going to believe. You always decide whether you can believe it or not. And it's going to be what your decision as to what you're going to believe. So I was looking around, since there's no definition of faith, well, what's the difference here? And I found that the only definition of faith I have ever found is in St. Paul. He said faith, he defined, is seeing darkly what we shall one day see face to face. That is his definition of faith. It's so beautiful, I can't tell you. In the end then, faith gives way to vision. Faith is seeing darkly, knowing darkly what one day you're going to see face to face. And this is the faith that's going to give way, the faith that we have now is going to give way to vision. Faith is a supernatural gift. It's not of our own doing. Belief is something we do, something we ought to do. Faith has nothing to do. It's not our doing. It is pure gift. Faith is pre-reflective or pre-conscious, whereas belief is always reflective and conscious. Now, let me repeat that. Faith is pre-reflective. It's before you even think about something. And it is pre-conscious, before you're even aware of it. Whereas belief is always, always depends upon your reflection of it and your consciousness of this. And on that you make your decisions whether you can or cannot believe. Faith has no adequate definition. We just define, you get your dictionary definitions of belief. But you're not going to find a definition of faith unless it just says that you believe something. So faith in itself has no definition. No adequate definition, and it's not in our heads. That's why it doesn't have a definition. Anything that's in your head, you can define belief because that's all in your head. And faith is not in your head, and it cannot be a concept. Faith is an obscure certitude that I call a truth sensor in man. It's the truth sensor in man. It is a seeing and a knowing, even an indefinable presence. You know you got it. You can't pinpoint where it is. You can't even define it. But there's something in us that just has faith, that is faith itself. We can talk about all our beliefs, and you're not going to hit faith at all. And it is a seeing and a knowing. I particularly like that word truth sensor in us. You know, we rarely hear the truth about anything in this life. But once in a while, and I've heard this from other people too, this just isn't mine. I've heard this from other people, that when we hear the truth, something in us just knows it. We just know it. But we cannot explain it. We would be hard put to explain to anybody, you know, why. And there again, you got to use the word belief, but you say, well, I know this is true, and that's all I know. I mean, that's no proof to anybody. Nobody's going to base their beliefs on your faith or what you know as faith, that truth. So, because you can't define it to them, you can't explain that to them, and it's beyond reason. It may even be unreasonable. here I quote Tertullian, which I've crossed out here. Tertullian was going into this whole subject here. You know, Tertullian was born by 150, 180. Interesting guy. He was a convert. He was the one who got up the term persona. What he was before he was a Christian, he was from Africa, by the way. He must, you know, I like these Africans, early fathers, you know, they were black, like Augustine is black. And anyway, he was a scholar in Roman law. You know, boom, boom, boom. He knew all in Roman law here. And when he came to Christianity, you know, where he loved it, he knew it, but he couldn't, but he himself said that it's unbelievable and that he could not explain this, but he knew it. And he said, I believe because it's absurd. Well, don't ever do that. But the point is that, well, belief can be absurd, to tell you the truth. I think belief, but not faith. But not faith. Anyway, I just want to make the point that it's beyond reason. It's just beyond reason. And but doesn't, as I said, it could even be unreasonable. It deals with the unknown. See, belief only deals with what you know, okay? What you can provide some evidence for. This is, so you base your belief on this. It just seems very evident to you. You have your so-called proofs, or you think you know that. And so it deals with the something known. Something you know. That's you think you know, you believe you know, put it that way. It deals with the known. It knows, let me see, whereas faith deals with the unknown. It knows in unknowing and not knowing. Thus it is not subject to doubt or disbelief. We do not know how we know faith, we just know it is there, it exists. And faith also is not an experience. Faith is the most mystical experience we have, and it's non-experiential. It's the greatest gift of God, and it's non-experiential. Nobody really experiences faith. It's somehow you know it. You know that truth sensor. It's there. And it's not an experience. It doesn't come and go. Experience is anything you experience comes and goes. It's all water under the bridge. If we had perfect faith, we would not need any experiences. Thus, perfect faith is no experience. As experience decreases, faith increases because experience is self. Now, this is where I use my little things to go over here, and I'll do that in a minute here. As experience decreases, faith increases, because that experience is itself. Now, I would like to demonstrate that here. Most of you have already seen these circles here. You know, my circles they represent yourself, this reflexive consciousness always looking at itself, and of course here's the little center, Almighty God, and you can reflect on God too here. Now, look at this. Faith is like the mustard seed. Let's put that in the middle. That's your center of your being here. And it's with you. And you have it here. Now, look what happens here. And this is all self. This is us and consciousness, everything we are, you might say. So look what happens here. As faith increases, self decreases. And which means you no longer need any kind of belief here, whatever you started with. Now you know. Now you know, and you know that much. And so here we have again. Let's just move ahead fast here. Now look how faith increases here, and what do we have here? Self decreases. Well, you're really in the know here, and self decreases here. And imagine this end thing here. Look at this. Self has so decreased here, and faith has increased. All this is faith, and this is all you got left of self. And then when you go down, well, there is no self there at all, but you got the faith. And we're going to say something about what that is. Okay, I just want you to see that what I mean when I say as experience. Now, all these are experiences, okay? Your experience of yourself, and your experiences of God, too. As these, well, I don't want, yeah. So your experiences here of God decrease. Whereas you might say God increases, or your faith increases here. I just want you to see the way, I decrease and God increases. You can put it that way. And this is the same with faith, because now you know. In the beginning you didn't know. So, but now you know. Let me see, we want experiences because we have too little faith. If people could understand this faith, they got that truth in them, they wouldn't be looking for experiences to try and verify this faith, this thing here. Sometimes God gives it to us here. But you have to understand that faith is not an experience here. And I said some people, one of the reasons they have experience, I often say, my whole life was one of experience, and I used to think, well, I didn't have the faith. And I'm telling you, that was a big thing with me. Because my spiritual journey didn't fit in with the proverbial party line. I don't have that faith. I know Christ, I know the Trinity, but that thing I didn't have. So I used to wonder about that, how that came about. And faith does not rely on any experience at all. Now, faith is selfless. Now, let's look at that. We just went through this. Self is experience and needs experiences in order to grow, whereas experience can be self-serving, self-satisfying, addicting, dependent, etc. Faith is selfless. Now, we just illustrated that here. This is this little pinpoint in us. This little pinpoint in us. That's no self right there in the middle. And then watch how this goes. Now, this is faith, and this is selfless. There's no self in faith at all. And so here we go all the way through, and here we go here. And faith itself is totally selfless. So faith increases, and there goes all our experiences too. I mean, we don't really need the experiences by this time anyway. And nobody would want this one. So, experiences may get in the way of recognizing the faith, of recognizing this thing of faith. Though experiences can help identify faith by what it is not, because faith is not an experience. You know what? People can say, oh, I've never experienced God, I don't know any, this kind of thing here. Well, all you can do is say, you got the faith. And a lot of people who have no experiences of God whatsoever have that faith. Because I say it's in everybody. Everybody has this faith in them. And I do think that people who need more experiences are, kind of weak. They don't have the strong enough faith. If you had a really strong faith, you wouldn't need any experiences, ever. Let me see. Experience can get in the way of recognizing faith, though experiences can help identify faith by what it is not. Not an experience, that is. Because it is selfless, faith is not fully recognized so long as self remains. Faith can really be recognized when there's no self. Better. The more we recognize as we go through our journey, the more we recognize faith is carrying us through this thing here. And faith is beyond belief. Faith enables us to get distance on our beliefs, to question them, even doubt them. Faith is what gives us, enables us. Because we know we got that faith, we know that, well, we can get distance on all these beliefs that are around us here. Remember, beliefs are something that we have chosen to believe. Something that it's more rational, more intellectual. Belief is intellectual, pretty much. It's in your head. But we know we have that faith. A lot. I want to tell you why I bring this out. There's a lot of people who don't want to depend on faith. They want to depend on belief because they feel that that they don't make a separation. They feel that if they don't believe, then they don't have any faith. And so they're not going to question any of their beliefs because they don't trust faith. They've mixed up. You understand the problem of mixing up our terms here. You have to understand belief is not faith. And then you can stand on faith. And it's strong. And they can say, how is this? How is that? Doesn't make, so this belief is no good. And I don't understand that. I don't care if that's true or not. This kind of thing. Your faith is going to allow you to get distance on it. And that's, I think that Christians, especially, I can't talk for other religion, they really need that. Because they need to stand back and really question their beliefs. And wonder if their life depends on what they believe. Or if they've got to be able to pinpoint and recognize that faith. Despite it all. It's beyond all belief. That's why I say, faith enables us to get distance on our beliefs, to question them, even doubt them. I used to try and doubt the existence of God. Oh, very hard, I can't tell you. Because I thought I wanted to get in somebody else's, some atheists, I want to see how they go about that, because I couldn't understand it. Well, I never succeeded. All I got back was a big belly laugh. It keeps us, faith, I'm serious, because you don't know how hard I tried to get rid of God in my life. Anyway, when I say it's beyond belief, it says, it keeps us from falling into illusions, error. I mean, faith does. It keeps us from falling into illusions, errors, and rigidity, or being gullible and brainwashed. You have to be careful of your beliefs. Boy, people are getting brainwashed all the time into one thing or the other, aren't they? I don't care what it is. It doesn't even have to be religion. But people are brainwashed. And so faith is the admission that we do not intellectually know on an intellectual basis. We don't know what that is. We have that faith. But don't ask me to believe this or that or describe it or anything else. I just know I have this. And I go on what I know. I don't go on what somebody else tells me that they know. Their intellectual beliefs. I'm not interested in their intellectual beliefs. Now, perfect faith is perfect love, perfect trust, and lack of fear. And I always say it's right here on the spine line. This is a state people come to. If you will never come to this fine line if you do not have perfect trust and perfect love and lack of absolute total lack of fear. It has to be perfect faith here. You don't realize it, maybe at this moment. Well, there has to be perfect trust. That's for sure. But I don't know that you would. I would not have calculated this as love, yeah, but we don't call anything really perfect there. I knew perfect trust. I would say I knew perfect trust. I didn't think I knew perfect faith. I never really questioned any of this. In fact, none of this stuff ever came up my whole life till after this went down. And that's when I really saw the difference here. And it is infused. Oh, now listen, this is kind of interesting what I connected faith with. According to John of the Cross, what faith is infused contemplation. He equates it with the dark nights of the soul. He calls these nights of faith. And what are these nights? It means seeing darkly. Now, to say that seeing darkly, people who are in those nights here, that's all they get is a bunch of darkness. But you see, this is faith. Then you see darkly, but someday you will see. That's a perfect definition right there, or experiential definition here of infused contemplation here. I want to tell you why it seems dark to us. As John of the Cross tells us, the reason for this darkness is because what it really is an excess of light. Now, you all know when you go out and look at the sun, well, you better not do that for very long because you're going to get blind. It will blind you, and you're not going to see anything. It will blind you. If you see things openly, this is in all the mystical literature everywhere, that it is an excess of light because you've been blinded. That's why you see God as darkness. That's why you see God darkly. This was why Moses on the mountain, he didn't see God, in this beautiful light or anything. It was a shadow. It was darkness. Because that's what it means to really see, when you really see God. Because, look, it blinds our intellect. It blinds our mind. We can't, what I call, bear the vision. It'll knock us out. And so, I've always connected his Nights of Faith with this infused contemplation. That's what he calls it. God infuses itself into soul. Now, instead of seeing God within, all you get is a black hole, maybe. And that, if somebody told you, well, that's an excess of light, you wouldn't believe it. You're so deprived of this beautiful light of God that you think you've seen, and you have seen. But now it's really coming through to you. And you cannot bear the vision. As long as it was a light, nice little comfortable light inside yourself, you can bear the vision. But once it really is going to start to take over in there, well, to tell somebody this is an excess of light, they don't like it. Seems like God has suddenly disappeared on them. And you really got God right there. If people could only understand this, it is so beautiful. But anyway, this is John of the Cross. Faith is infused contemplation. All right, it is the inner eye that sees God. Faith is that inner eye that sees God. Ultimately, it is the eye seeing itself. Faith is the eye seeing itself. The seeing God. We shall know even as we are known by God, that is. This is a quote from the Bible. We're going to be known even as we are known. We shall know even as we are known. Namely, you're going to be known. You will know yourself as God knows you, okay? We will be known. We shall know with God's own knowing. That's the whole point there. Thus we gradually put on the mind of Christ. Know as Christ knows. Know God. Same as the humanity of Christ. Faith and truth are actually the same things. God's side is truth. Let me see here. I put it like this side. Faith and truth are the same thing. God's side is truth, and our side is faith. Say, this is God. This little thing's God. And God's side is the truth, and this is our side, and that's the faith. Our side's faith is God in us, and truth is God in itself. Faith is God in us, and truth is God in itself. Do you get the difference? This, what we call God in us, is really faith, but God in itself is the truth, but they're really the same thing. Okay? So, faith is like a mustard seed. Let me see, faith and truth, okay. Faith is like a mustard seed that must grow. But how can God grow? There cannot be more or less of God. There can only be more or less of self. This says self decreases and belief decreases. This is something really important to bring out. God increases. As faith increases, belief decreases. Now, of course, I want to bring out this little thing about the little flower Therese here, but I want you to see how this goes here. Let me see, like a mustard seed. There cannot be more or less of God, or even more or less of faith. And belief here, too. This is what I want to demonstrate. Because this is really how it goes in the spiritual life. This is very important to bring out in people's spiritual life. The more faith you have, the less you need belief. Can you understand that? Because you really know. You know so much. And you don't need all these beliefs. And just think of it here. I mean, this is, to think the whole spiritual life goes with you decreasing all your beliefs. Your beliefs are decreasing. Because self is decreasing. And who believes is self? So, beliefs decrease as faith increases. God's increasing. And less of self. Now, a lot of people think they're losing their beliefs. Or they may have lost something else there. And, of course, we're constantly warned about, losing our belief system and all that. Got to hang on. And I'm telling you, that's to be brainwashed. You got to hang on like that. You have to be open. And so, it's a phenomena Because when you get to the end of the journey here, you can really say, I don't believe in anything. I know what I know. I know what I know. And that's all what I know, like Popeye the Sailor Man said. And so this is, that's how it goes. And then I thought I would tell you this cute little story here I often do about, the little flower. She's a little 24-year-old Carmelite nun in France that died around the turn of the century in 1900 and so. And she had 4 sisters. She was this pious little kid. And she entered the monastery, she's 14 or 15. And unfortunately, she got TB and died. But she was thinking, now, as I'm telling you, she was an ordinary little girl. And of course, she had other sisters that were Carmelites, and her mama had died when she was young. They brought her up. So that was her mama, and her dad was going off his rocker, so she went into the monastery with her sisters there. It's a very austere life. And she thought, now, the what we call in Carmel, what we call our holy parents, is St. John of the Cross is the founder of the Discalced Carmelites, along with St. Teresa of Avila. 2 of the greatest mystics considered by many, 2 of the greatest mystics, at least in Catholicism, and probably even the Protestants know them. They're just notorious mystics here. And she was thinking, how would you feel that if you entered an order where this was the, and their statues are all over, you read their books, this is, your models. Well, how can you model yourself on these great individuals and all that their lives? It's just fantastic. And here she went, what's a little 14, 15-year-old kid going to do here? And she thought, I can never, I'm a nobody. I just can never have any of their experiences. She couldn't expect anything like that. She was nothing. And then she had this idea. She said, well, I'm like a little thimble. And St. Teresa was like a big stein, a big mug. This big, and here she was down here, this little thing down here. And then she thought to herself, well, full is full. Full is full. You fill that thimble with God. And you fill this mug with God. You both have the fullness of God. What I don't know she said this, but what you have to understand here is that she had a little self. St. Teresa had a big self. Did you get the difference? She didn't, because full is full. Now look, God is just as much in a drop of water as God is in the ocean, okay? Can you get the comparison? When, one drop of God is fullness of God. Doesn't matter here. So the only conclusion is, and it's true, she had a little self. Not this great big, this one was a St. Teresa, big giant. Somebody to deal with, I'll tell you. She had a big self. And God really had to work on that with all his mysticism and all his graces here to get her in oneness with God. Well, she didn't even start her spiritual life till she was 39. She fooled around. She entered the monastery at age 18, fooled around till she was 39. Can you believe it? Well, and then she had her little conversion experience, and now we have the Discalced Carmelites, which is a great order. She was a great person anyway. I got to tell you, to me, I don't like her spirituality. I can't stand all that vision and voices junk. But as a character, as a human historical figure, I regard her as one of the greatest women in history. You have to understand her and the times in which she lived. Brother, talk about somebody clever. She could wrap those bishops and everybody around her finger, get what she wanted. She was something else, just something else to deal with. Her own character here. But anyway, but I'd like to put that down here, that full is full. So what does it matter? St. Teresa's a great big mystic here. She had no more God than this little flower here who had, maybe a couple of experiences of God. She had nobody. Of course, God did tremendous miracles. More for this one than this one. Of course, this one's way back in the 15th or 15th, 16th century. 15th. Well, 15 something. And here's this little one up here at 1900 here. But I like the point. I like the point that you can't have more or less of God. There's no such thing as having more God or less God. You can only have more self or less self. And this is what my circle tour is about, more or less. And so too, you can have more faith and less belief. It works the same way, because self is the one with his intellect who's going to take up all his beliefs. Whereas faith, boy, that belongs with God, and that is that gift. And so that will increase as your beliefs decrease. That's kind of spooky for some people. They're afraid they're going to run out of beliefs. And then what are they going to do? Well, if you don't know faith, well, what can I say? They better discover it. Faith is central to Christianity, but not to other religions. Others have it, but it is not central. We make a big thing out of faith in Christianity. However, I know this a friend of mine, Nancy. She says that the Buddhists too make a big thing out of faith. I don't know, but anyway, this is huge for us because we recognize it as a gift of God. It's a real gift, and I'll tell you a little more about it. And so, grace. What is grace? Grace is the dynamic activity of faith in us. It's the activity of faith in us. God's dynamic life in us. Not just a presence, a dynamic life in us. It's the medium of growth, of transformation, sanctification, deification, transfiguration, even transubstantiation. Now, I go through, I took in everything I think of there. To be totally transformed into Christ is salvation. Growth in grace is what the sacraments are all about. This is Christ still with us, his life being duplicated, recapitulated in ourselves. We being reincarnated, ours becoming God's own human nature. Faith is not only the means to God, but the end. Belief is not a sufficient means to God. Belief's going to net you nothing. Only faith is a sufficient means to God. I am the way is the means. The way is the means. The truth is unbelievable. And the life, it's our life. No one goes to the Father but through me. Now think of that. The way, the means, and which is faith, and the truth, which is unbelievable anyway. I mean, it's not a matter of belief, put it that way. The truth is not a matter of belief. And the life, that's our life. No one goes to the Father but by me. So in the end, we learn that this is what I learned. And this is why I make a big fuss out of this difference between faith and belief. What I learned is faith is God, and has been all along. Thus, the means and the end are God. And I would put this, I just would put this, this has to be a very personal note here. Because I was wondering, you know, all this, this is all water under the bridge, that stuff there. You know, you wonder, what enabled you to go through this whole journey here? What really sustained that whole thing? How could you put up with that? What is that remained, you know, stable throughout? That you didn't waver, you didn't give up? Of course, I was willing to give up myself, and I didn't believe in very little. And so, what is that in you that keeps you going? I wonder that, because when I was little and I was informed that God had work to do in me, and forget yourself. I mean, whatever you think about it or what you want, just forget it. And it occurred to me, it was kind of frightening. And it occurred to me, God's going to experiment on me. And I do believe, and I believe that. See, that always stayed with me all my life. And I do believe that God wants to see how far God can push the human limits. Because I want to tell you, this thing here goes over the human limits, right here. And God can do that, and something still survives here. So God is pushing the human limits. And that's the way I saw my spiritual life all the way through. I thought, there he goes again. This is a big experiment. How can you take this? I mean, somebody else might say, we're going to run away, I couldn't. How can you? I tried not to believe anything. I tried to get rid of God. Everything. And nothing works. Nothing worked for me to undo that and run away and get away from it all and everything. So I thought, what is this thing? There must be something in man that, despite everything, it just shows, going to go right on, kind of not going to let you get away. And that's when it came to me that there's a kind of revelation, you might say. That was faith. And faith turns out to be God. So the only definition that I could really give you of faith is that it is God in you. It's nothing else. Faith is Almighty God in you. That I knew. And God is the one holding the line. God is the one who's right there, making it all possible, holding the line so you don't collapse, you don't go batty, you don't give up. God is the one who's sustaining this. God is the one who's standing firm through all this. While you're going all over the place, just to pieces. And God is the one who's just holding the line. I'm telling you, faith turns out to be just absolutely spectacular. And I only end this with a note. The universality of faith, everybody has it, but differences of belief. Have you noticed that faith is universal in everybody? But look at beliefs. They go all over the place, don't they? Well, think of all our religions and everything that people believe. They go all over the place. But faith is just one thing. It's a universal, and it is one thing. And there's, let me see, but differences of belief, I got one in the many, or one faith and many beliefs. That's the way to put it. It's just one faith, but we got all kinds of many beliefs. And faith also is non-exclusive, whereas belief is exclusive. What you believe and what you believe, it's exclusive to you. And what the guy down the street believes, it's belief. It's exclusive to him. Whereas faith is non-exclusive. That guy's got it too, and so do you. And don't define it as belief, because you've all got totally different beliefs, opposing beliefs. So faith is not dualistic. It's the same for everyone, while belief is dualistic. In other words, always multiple. You get all these multiple beliefs here. So I also wrote down faith is beyond subject and object. You can't say it. You can't put your finger on it. But forget that whole thing. And perfect faith is perfect love, trust, and lack of fear. Now, that, let me see. Now, I just, in the margins here, I put down, faith is really God's presence in us, and grace is God's activity in us. I just make the distinction between faith and grace here. Now, this, I want to, well, anyway, I think this is my view anyway. There was a man in one of my retreats who came there and he said, I don't have any beliefs, and I've never believed anything, and I don't intend to believe anything. I thought, what's he doing here, this kind of thing? And so, when you've been doing this for years and years, you learn to all kinds of people. They're supposed to not even come unless they've read the books or know something about you or anything else. And another guy just said to me, I don't know anything about you. I don't even know what anything is about. I haven't read your books or anything, but I'm here. You wonder. I do so hard to try and weed people out. You're not supposed to come unless you've read those books and seen that video. And then when they're sent the invitation to the retreat, it's got on there, don't come if you think she's going to discuss anything else but these 4 topics of Trinity and Christ and faith. I mean, we're not into psychology. She's not, forget all that, or some other religion. And that does knock out people, some, but you never get them all. And, but anyway, I'm pretty convinced this man ended up just adorable on the retreat that came with no beliefs. Because when we talked about faith, talk about recognition, talk about somebody who recognized he had that faith. And he described certain things to us that even before we got to faith here, that I knew that he had that faith. I knew that. I'm one of those, having been through all that junk, that, I can recognize things there. Because of what I knew, my lack of faith and everything. I know all this. So, it didn't disturb me, his view. But I'm really convinced that this brought it home to him. That faith is beyond belief. And, well, I hate to recommend that people throw out all their beliefs. I don't want to get in that kind of, I don't know what to say about that. I only know that the truth is beyond belief. And that is the faith. That is faith. God will let you know that's a truth sensor in everybody. And people, if they could realize that, they wouldn't be afraid to question, their beliefs. And I think people should. Doesn't necessarily mean you give them up, but I think you should. In fact, beliefs are good to have something to question. They're good to have something to doubt. And see if you can. See what you can do with your beliefs. But, so I'm just not a believer, put it that way. And anyway, this might mean something to other people here.